Occasionally we do venture into direct democracy. You've had experience with Brexit. And then this is terrifying. We don't want that. But this is us taking responsibility.
So what is it then in a political context? Is it a rhetorical device? Are we simply using the word freedom to try to persuade others that we are a good thing, to persuade others to adopt our outlook?
I think so, overwhelmingly. And look, part of it is, and it's interesting to run this discussion here in the UK, because one of the key aspects in all of this discussion when it comes to political life is that we have relied almost consistently on representative democracy. I mean, what is the notion of representative democracy? Representative democracy is we, going to the ballots every couple of years, then basically choosing them to run our affair, which is also a way for us to shirk responsibility, right? We don't have to make the choice. We don't have to take responsibility, guilt, shame, whatever, for those choices being made. Occasionally, we do venture into direct democracy. You've had experience with Brexit. Other people worldwide, of course. And then this is terrifying. We don't want that. But this is us taking responsibility for good or for bad. I, for example, think, although if I were a UK citizen, I think I would vote against Brexit, but never mind that. I think it was wonderful that you had it, partly because it was an element in the learning process of the whole European Union. It's no accident that we didn't have another sort of exit after Brexit. Maybe in the UK, you would have been willing to engage more in direct democracy. And like in Ireland, with citizens' assemblies before that, so the people get informed. Instead of that, we prefer to live in a sort of a post-truth era, where facts do not matter, and we vote for those politicians who can control our life, again, control, and we shirk responsibility. Everybody are happy? I don't know. Look at public opinion polls about happiness. It doesn't look that good. So maybe there are ways to try and explore better the ways of freedom in politics.
Faiza.
Yeah, I mean, just using that example of citizens' assemblies is interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes, you say that's about their choice, it's about them having a say, but often we could do those here, but we don't want to. We don't want to hear. We don't want to listen, right? And people make those choices. I was interested, Uriel, in what you were saying. I just started feeling quite like a socialist because I was like, the ability to exercise choice is very much constrained for some people. And I think you can have the choice to do certain things, but if you're in a situation whereby, you're really struggling, you're homeless or whatever, then what choices do you have, right? And so I think, in understanding, I agree that we don't understand what freedom is and liberty and those things, but I do think we need to understand these things in the context of an economy, of a society that gives people different opportunities to exercise their freedoms. And I think, and I think the example of Afghan, I always just Afghanistan, of course, it's like a huge problem, and I think most of them, I assume a lot of the population would be very much against what's happening. But you cannot divorce what freedoms people have currently there from war, from colonialism, from the economic situation of that country. And I think sometimes when we have these discussions, we can get into these really interesting conversations, but the realities are very, very different on the ground. I think in terms of like the rhetorical tool, I've been really interested in looking at how Kamala Harris has been using it in terms of bodily autonomy against Trump. And I think it's really interesting. I have friends there that worked a lot on how the left and progressives should be framing arguments. And what they realized was that they'd left the argument about freedom to the Republicans, to the right. And that was a huge mistake because in the American context, especially, it's a really important ideal in people's minds. And so they're taking that back. And so they've done a lot of work around how to frame, keeping the state out of your body, for instance, that appeals to a lot of people in that context. So I think, I just think freedom, it taps into something for people, like you say, in so many different parts of the world, there's this sense of wanting that freedom. And so for those of us arguing in different parts of the political sphere, we do end up having to frame it and think about how we use that language to appeal to people to vote for us or to go for a particular policy.
Yeah, and Lisa, that the idea that there is a kind of universally acknowledged good that is freedom. I mean, that operates very, very differently in different some political contexts privilege freedom from, to go back to that discussion, over freedom too, and that goes right down through a political system. So isn't there a danger that this kind of invocation, the way we invoke the word freedom, is just a way of, it's just another rhetorical device. It's another tool of persuasion that I might hold very different political views from you, but I will argue that my views are advancing freedom in ways that yours are not.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like freedom, as I say, is on that continuum, and people don't want absolute freedom, but they do want to have a level of freedom that gives them well-being. And if you look at, and I had the opportunity to go over to Copenhagen to visit the Wellbeing Institute there, because they have a society and a model where people are generally happier and feel better in themselves, and perhaps a more equal society as well in many ways. They have more opportunity to spend time with family, and families, held up as being very important in terms of the fabric of their society, and they have opportunity to be in green spaces and, to thrive and develop themselves, and perhaps, to have that aspiration to, to be all they can be, no matter from their background. And those issues, I think, are the important parts of the freedom that we discuss in terms of why people think freedom is very, very important. But it's about having those opportunities in our society, having the ability to aspire, having a level of control over things, but having well-being built into society and greater equality as well. And I think that, when we speak about freedom, we shouldn't speak about it in isolation from those other aspects politically.
But those are all desirable goods. But Uriel, you talked about the post-truth world that we inhabit. And actually, that's a world in which the rhetorical device of freedom is rather heavily used. Mm-hmm. That the right to spread damaging lies, for example, has been, that's been invoked as the kind of right of freedom of speech. So does it work as a rhetorical device? Does it win people over?
Definitely. And the thing is that we are so willingly embrace that. Because again, there is something sort of liberating in the post-truth era, because we don't want to engage in facts in the way that perhaps we used to do. It is a burden as well, right? The knowledge in it by itself. And it is something, this is part of the reason that I emphasize citizens' assembly. I think this is one way at least to try and combat that. And you mentioned the rhetorics of the current presidential election campaign in the US. And it's interesting, that aspect of emphasizing the right of abortion in both contexts, right? Because ultimately, what is referred to as the pro-choice camp in the US, think about the concept, bodily autonomy. It's basically, I control my body. It's not so much about pro-choice, it's about pro-control. And I'll go a step further that I know will be sounds provocative. I don't mean it to be provocative, this is just what I think. In the ongoing fight for gay marriages, what was the key argument that was being made? We have no choice. This is how nature created us. Now, to a certain extent, there is scientific foundation for that.
Wasn't it free to love?
What?
Free to love who you are. I thought that was...
Why not say, this is whom I choose to love, to have sex with? Fine, go ahead and do that. No, we have to camouflage it, apropos the mask, apropos trying to steer away from truth, okay? And say, no, this is how nature created us. There is no choice in the matter, period. And this we do again and again in so many walks of life. And going back to that citizens' assembly in Ireland, nobody thought that they are going to approve it because, Catholic society and all of that. But in a matter of months after they had that assembly, people discussed it out in the open. Then they had referendum. In both the assembly and the referendum, about 2/3 voted for that. Okay, so I think that there is that yearning. We know that within ourselves, that we want to have that capacity. It's terrifying, all of that, very true. But we can try to cultivate it as human beings. Look, some of you perhaps have read the Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. If you remember how it starts, right? There's only one big philosophical question, and that is suicide. And I know, again, it's a bit provocative, but that is true. That is true. Why do we walk about? True enough, we didn't choose to be born, but at every single moment in our life, we can choose to just end it. And so we can say to ourselves, okay, this is the way things are, we just walk about. Instead, we can try to embrace that choice, because this is profoundly human. And think for ourselves, is there really purpose, meaning, some sort of justification for our life? And try to live it to the fullest. And that, I think, is not disconnected from politics. It's something that politics, the way that it is done now, in representative democracy and otherwise, of course, in non-democracy, is a way to suppress that human urge, which we can try to cultivate much more.
So Faiza, should we be more suspicious of the idea of freedom if it is an effective rhetorical device which delivers people to unfreedom?
Yeah, I mean, I am always wary of where that becomes so individualized and you don't think about what potential harms that has for society and others. And so, you know, I've found in my life, speaking to people that are struggling, that sometimes I'll say, I'm just glad to be alive, kind of speaking to your point, you know, I'm just living and I'll just be, but so one of my aunts who had a terrible time in Pakistan because of really bad healthcare, you know, she just kind of moved to that position where it's just, you know, just to be alive is a good thing or whatever. And to me, it just feels like in that context, I got annoyed because I was like, actually, this is an excuse for governments. This is an excuse for people not to make things better. The reason why you've gone through this hard time is not because of, you know, Allah decided to like kill off all your family. It was because of really poor healthcare and because there's not enough pressure on the state here to actually deliver better. And what an incredible excuse. Well,
exactly.
Right? What a get out of jail card, you know? So I think, you know, for me, I'm always thinking about how we make sure that, you know, maximizing well-being, however you want to put it. And so freedom can be a helpful rhetorical device, and I can see where it's helpful from different perspectives. But I think as someone on the left, you know, I'm always concerned where it undermines our ability to make society better as a whole, and where individual freedoms like harm others.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.